Liam thought his wife Clara had married him for the quiet, steady man he was. He thought the life they had built, simple and unassuming, was a testament to a love that transcended the superficial gloss of wealth and status. He was wrong. And within the gilded confines of the Azure Horizon Resort, under the crushing weight of her designer luggage and the even heavier weight of her disappointment, he would come to understand just how wrong he had been. The man she made carry her bags, the man she allowed her arrogant ex-boyfriend to belittle, was the secret founder of Nexus Dynamics, a technology empire worth $41 billion. They were all confident in their assumptions, nestled in the plush comfort of their perceived superiority. What they didn't know was that their world, and the very ground beneath their feet, was about to be purchased out from under them. I'm so glad you're here for this story today. It's one that I think will really make us think about what we value in people. If you enjoy stories about hidden strength and seeing arrogance get its just desserts, do me a favor and give this video a quick thumbs up. It really helps. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from today. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let's get back to the Azure Horizon, where a storm was gathering behind the sunniest of skies. The air in the resort lobby was a carefully curated symphony of climate control, faint floral notes, and the hushed murmur of wealth. It was a cathedral of leisure, with soaring ceilings of polished teak and a wall of glass that looked out onto an ocean so impossibly blue it seemed like a digital rendering. Julian, Clara's ex-boyfriend, stood at the center of it all, a conductor of attention. He was tall, dressed in a linen shirt that was artfully unbuttoned just so, and he laughed a little too loudly as he presented a sleek, black credit card to the receptionist. "Just put everything on my account," he said, the words rolling out with practiced ease. "The Monarch suite, of course." Clara stood beside him, a faint, appreciative blush on her cheeks. She looked at Julian, then cast a sideways glance at her husband, Liam, who was standing a few feet away, holding her two oversized suitcases, a carry-on, and his own simple canvas duffel bag. Liam's jeans were worn but clean, his polo shirt a generic navy blue. He was the picture of unremarkable. In this environment, he was practically invisible, a beige shape against a vibrant mural. Clara's smile tightened. A flicker of something, annoyance, embarrassment, crossed her features before she masked it with a bright, brittle smile. "Liam, darling, could you be a dear and just wait by the entrance with those? I'm sure the bellhop will be along eventually." The word darling was a shard of glass wrapped in velvet. Liam heard the unspoken message beneath it. "Stay out of sight. You don't belong here." He simply nodded, his expression unreadable. He adjusted his grip on the bags. The leather handle of Clara's largest suitcase dug into his palm. He had designed the internal architecture for a global logistics network that moved millions of tons of cargo a day, solving problems of weight and distribution that would make a physicist weep. And here he was, a human luggage cart, his primary function to be unobtrusive. The irony was a low, bitter hum beneath the surface of his calm. Julian sauntered over, clapping a hand on Liam's shoulder with performative camaraderie. "Attaboy, Liam. Good to have you here. Keeping the little woman happy, I see." He winked at Clara, who offered a weak, complicit laugh. "Don't you worry about a thing," Julian continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I'll take care of Clara this week. You just focus on, well, whatever it is you do." Julian's business was a boutique investment firm that Liam knew from a 30-second search on his phone weeks ago, managed less than $50 million and was leveraged to the hilt. It was a house of cards painted to look like a fortress. Julian projected an image of staggering success, a fiction built on his father's money and a talent for spending it. Liam, on the other hand, was a ghost. He was the architect of Nexus Dynamics, a company whose server farms consumed more electricity than a small country, and whose proprietary AI shaped market trends, political polling, and the very flow of information across the globe. His net worth wasn't just a number, it was a gravitational force, warping reality around it. He had spent years cultivating an identity as a freelance data analyst, a quiet, unassuming man who lived in a modest suburban home, all to find a partner who could see the man, not the monolith of wealth behind him. He had believed Clara was that person. The bellhop, a young man with a nervous energy, finally arrived, his eyes darting from Julian's expensive watch to Liam's plain attire. He naturally addressed Julian first. "Sir, I can take those bags for you." Julian gestured dismissively towards Liam. "He's got them. Take Mrs. Thorne's purse, though." He handed over Clara's small, elegant handbag as if it were a scepter. Clara's maiden name was Thorne. Julian's use of it was a subtle, deliberate erasure of her marriage to Liam. It was a power play, a way of staking a claim and reminding everyone, including Clara herself, of a time when she was with him, a man he considered Liam's superior in every conceivable way. Clara didn't correct him. She simply smiled, a little flustered, and thanked Julian for being so thoughtful. Liam watched this exchange, his grip on the suitcases unwavering. Each slight, each casual dismissal was a data point. He was an analyst, after all. He collected, he collated, he looked for patterns, and the pattern emerging was one of deep, structural decay. The foundation of his marriage, which he had believed was built on solid ground, was revealing itself to be nothing but sand. He followed them towards the grand elevator bank, his footsteps silent on the marble floor. He carried the weight of Clara's bags, but a far heavier burden was settling in his heart. The dawning, devastating realization that his wife was ashamed of him. She wasn't just tolerating the disrespect, she was a silent participant, her silence a form of applause for her ex-boyfriend's cruelty. And Liam, a man who could move markets with a single phone call, remained perfectly still, his patience a coiled spring gathering tension. The week had just begun. The first dinner was an exercise in theatrical condescension, staged in the resort's most exclusive restaurant. The room was a whisper of muted colors and soft lighting, where the clinking of silverware against porcelain was the loudest sound. A table with a panoramic view of the sunset had been reserved, naturally, by Julian. He sat at the head of the table, flanked by Clara and her parents, Richard and Eleanor Thorne, who had flown in to join them. Liam was seated at the far end, next to Eleanor, a position that was both physically and conversationally remote. Richard Thorne was a man who wore his anxieties like an expensive but ill-fitting suit. He ran a mid-sized manufacturing company that had been struggling for years, a fact he tried to hide behind a blustering, authoritative demeanor. Eleanor was his echo, a woman whose primary concern was the maintenance of appearances. They both adored Julian. He represented the world they desperately wanted to be a part of: effortless wealth, social standing, and the confidence that came with it. "The wine list here is simply superb," Julian announced, holding the leather-bound menu as if it were a sacred text. "They have a 98 Screaming Eagle, an absolute gem." He looked around the table, his gaze pointedly skipping over Liam. "Of course, it's a bit steep for most, but for a special occasion—" He let the sentence hang in the air, the implication clear. "I can afford it. You cannot." Richard puffed up his chest. "Excellent choice, Julian. A man of taste." Liam glanced at the wine list. He owned a majority stake in the vineyard that produced Screaming Eagle. He had attended a private tasting with the winemaker just last month, sampling the 21 vintage straight from the barrel. He preferred the 2007 in any case. He said nothing. He took a sip of his water. "So, Liam," Richard began, turning to him with the air of a king addressing a court petitioner, "Clara tells us you're still doing computer work? Freelancing?" The word freelancing was delivered with a distinct note of pity. "I'm a data analyst," Liam replied, his voice even and calm. It was his standard, carefully constructed cover, vague enough to be uninteresting, technical enough to discourage follow-up questions. Julian let out a short, derisive laugh. Data analyst. That sounds fascinating. You crunch the numbers, do you? Spreadsheets and all that? He leaned forward, a smirk playing on his lips. I was just telling Richard about the algorithm my firm developed. It predicts micro fluctuations in the commodities market. We saw a 17% return last quarter alone. It's all about having the right data, of course, but more importantly, it's about knowing what to do with it. It was Liam's algorithm, or rather, it was a cheap, pirated imitation of a public-facing 5-year-old version of the Nexus AI that Liam had released as a freeware tool for academics. The real version, the one running on his quantum servers, didn't just predict micro-fluctuations. It created them. It was the ghost in the machine of the entire global economy. To hear Julian brag about this Fisher-Price version of his life's work was like listening to a child boast about finger painting the Mona Lisa. That sounds impressive, Liam said, his tone perfectly neutral. Clara shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She looked at Liam, a desperate plea in her eyes. Play along. Be impressed. Don't make this awkward. She wanted him to validate Julian's posturing, to accept his designated role as the lesser man. Her loyalty was not to her husband's dignity, but to the smooth, uninterrupted flow of the evening. It is impressive, Julian affirmed, leaning back with satisfaction. But it's a high-stakes world, not for the faint of heart. You have to be willing to risk it all to win it all. He took a deliberate sip of his wine, his eyes locking onto Liam's. What's the biggest deal you've ever closed, Liam? The one that really got the blood pumping. The question was a trap, a verbal dead end designed to humiliate. The biggest deal Liam had ever closed was the acquisition of a rival satellite communications network for $3.5 billion, a negotiation he conducted from his laptop in a coffee shop, while Clara thought he was bidding for freelance coding gigs on Upwork. The second biggest was the secret government contract to build a secure national data infrastructure, a deal so sensitive it technically didn't exist. I don't really think in terms of deals, Liam said softly. My work is more project-based. I help clients organize their information. Julian's smirk widened into a triumphant grin. He looked at Clara's parents as if to say, "See, this is what you let your daughter marry." Richard shook his head almost imperceptibly, a look of profound disappointment on his face. Eleanor was studying the floral centerpiece with intense focus, refusing to meet anyone's eye. But the sharpest cut came from Clara. She reached across the table and patted Liam's hand, a gesture that seemed supportive but was, in fact, an act of public pity. Liam's work is very stable, she said to the table, her voice bright and forced. It's not as exciting as your world, Julian, of course, but we have a good life. Simple, but good. Simple. The word landed like a stone in the pit of his stomach. Their life wasn't simple by choice. It was a deliberate, complex illusion he had painstakingly crafted. He had built it to protect them, to find something real in a world obsessed with artifice. And his wife, the one person he thought understood its value, was now apologizing for it. She was framing their life as a consolation prize. Throughout the rest of the meal, Liam became a ghost at the table. The conversation flowed around him, a torrent of talk about yachts, ski chalets in Gstaad, and Julian's latest real estate venture. Liam was the silent, invisible man, the humble provider of a simple life that his wife was now viewing through a lens of regret. He felt a profound sense of dislocation, as if he were watching a play about his own life from a great distance. He reached into his pocket and his fingers brushed against the worn, familiar leather of his wallet. It was old, scuffed at the corners, the kind of wallet a man who genuinely earned a modest living might carry for a decade. Inside, nestled behind his driver's license, was a thin, black card made of anodized aluminum. It had no numbers, no name, only a single silver symbol, the Nexus Helix. It was a key, a universal access card that could open doors that Julian and Richard Thorne didn't even know existed. He felt its cool, hard edge against his thumb. It was a reminder. Patience, it seemed to say. The data is still being collected. The next day, the sun was a brilliant, unforgiving white. The pool area of the azure horizon was a tableau of performative relaxation. Bronzed bodies lay on plush loungers. Oversized sunglasses hid vacant stares, and the air smelled of coconut sunscreen and chlorine. Julian had reserved a sprawling cabana for the group, a private oasis of shade and comfort with its own mini-fridge and attentive server. He was holding court, regaling Eleanor and Richard with a story about a tense business negotiation in Singapore. He gestured dramatically, his voice carrying across the water. Clara lay on a lounger, wearing a stylish, expensive bikini that Liam had never seen before. She had, he realized, bought an entirely new wardrobe for this trip, a wardrobe designed to fit into Julian's world, not theirs. She laughed at Julian's story, a bright, tinkling sound that grated on Liam's nerves. She looked happy. She looked like she belonged. Liam was sitting on the edge of a lounger just outside the cabana's sphere of influence, a book resting unread in his lap. He felt like a piece of furniture that had been left out in the sun. "Liam!" Clara called out, her voice sharp. She didn't look at him, her gaze fixed on the cabana's ceiling. "My drink is empty. Could you get me another spritzer?" It wasn't a request, it was an order, the kind one gives to a subordinate. Before Liam could respond, Julian chimed in. "And grab me a beer while you're at it, buddy. A cold one." He tossed a wadded-up napkin in Liam's general direction. "And tell the server to be quicker this time." Liam looked at Clara. He waited for her to say something, to object, to tell her ex-boyfriend not to speak to her husband that way. He waited for a flicker of protest, a sign of allegiance. Nothing. She adjusted her sunglasses and took a deep breath, as if savoring the warmth of the sun, entirely oblivious or indifferent to the casual humiliation being heaped upon him. Her silence was a choice. It was permission. Slowly, Liam stood up. He walked to the poolside bar, the concrete hot beneath his sandals. He felt the eyes of the other guests on him, the man in the generic swim trunks and faded t-shirt being sent on an errand. He was the help. He ordered the drinks, his voice low and even. As he waited, he pulled out his phone. It was an older model, its case slightly cracked, another part of his carefully maintained persona. He scrolled through his contacts, past names that could launch companies or topple governments, and found the one he was looking for. Anya Petrova. He stepped away from the bar, turning his back to the pool. He pressed the call button. She answered on the first ring. "Liam." Her voice was crisp, efficient, with a faint Eastern European accent. Anya was his chief operating officer, a woman with a mind like a steel trap who ran the day-to-day operations of his multi-billion-dollar empire. "Anya," he said, his voice dropping into a different register. The quiet, unassuming data analyst was gone. In his place was the CEO, the man in charge. "The portfolio for the Azure Horizon property. Have you reviewed it?" "This morning," she confirmed. "It's owned by a holding company, a subsidiary of a Luxembourg-based private equity firm. Heavily leveraged, thin margins. They've been looking for a quiet exit for the last 6 months." "What's the asking price?" Liam asked, watching the bartender pour Clara's spritzer into a tall glass. "They're asking $900 million. It's worth maybe $750, $780 on a good day." "Offer them $1.2 billion in cash," Liam said without hesitation. "No due diligence, no contingencies. I want the deal closed in 48 hours. Use the Orion subsidiary. And Anya, make sure the final transfer of ownership is personally delivered to me here at the resort. I want the papers in my hand by Friday evening." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Anya Petrova was not a woman given to surprise, but the request was unusual. Liam was typically hands-off with acquisitions of this nature. "Understood, Liam," she said. "Consider it done. Is there anything else?" "Yes," Liam said, his eyes finding his wife across the pool. She was laughing again, tilting her head back as Julian whispered something in her ear. The manufacturing firm, Thorn Industries. I want a full workup on my desk by morning. Financials, supply chain, debt load, everything. Thorn, Anya repeated. As in Richard Thorn? The very same, Liam confirmed. I'll have it for you, she said. Liam, is everything all right? The question was rare for her, a small crack in her professional facade. Liam watched as Julian reached out and playfully flicked a drop of water at Clara, and she squealed with delight. Everything is becoming perfectly clear, Anya, he said, his voice flat and cold. Thank you. He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. He picked up the drinks and walked back towards the cabana. The spritzer was a vibrant orange, the beer bottle slick with condensation. He felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. The analyst had finished collecting his data. The period of observation was over. Now it was time to act. He placed the spritzer on the small table beside Clara and handed the beer to Julian. Took you long enough, Julian muttered, not even looking at him. Liam didn't reply. He returned to his seat on the periphery, opened his book, and for the first time that day, he began to read. The words on the page were a blur. In his mind, he was building a new kind of architecture, not of data, but of consequences. A structure so elegant and so inescapable that when it came down, it would bring their entire world of blissful ignorance down with it. The foundation was already being laid. The afternoon bled into evening, and the humiliations continued, each one a small, steady drip of poison. Julian, emboldened by his audience, suggested a game of tennis. Come on, Liam, let's have a friendly match, he'd boomed, knowing full well that Liam had politely mentioned weeks ago that he didn't play. When Liam declined, Julian had turned to Clara with a look of theatrical pity. Your man doesn't have a competitive bone in his body, does he? Clara's answering smile was tight with embarrassment. Later, by the infinity pool, Richard Thorne cornered Liam while he was retrieving a towel for Eleanor. He placed a heavy, paternal hand on Liam's shoulder. Son, he began, his voice a low rumble of feigned concern. I'm worried about Clara. She's used to a certain quality of life. A man needs to have ambition. He needs to provide. Are you truly doing everything you can for my daughter? Liam met his father-in-law's gaze. This was the man whose company, as Anya's preliminary report had confirmed, was teetering on the brink of insolvency. He was leveraged with 3 different banks. His credit lines were maxed out, and a key materials contract was about to be canceled by his supplier. Richard Thorne was a captain standing on the bridge of a sinking ship, lecturing a man who owned the entire ocean. I believe I provide a good life for Clara, Liam said, his voice measured. We have everything we need. Richard sighed, shaking his head. Need is one thing, Liam. Want is another. A woman like Clara, she deserves more than just what she needs. He clapped Liam's shoulder again, a gesture of dismissal, and walked away, leaving Liam standing alone with the towel in his hand. The breaking point, the moment the fine cracks in Liam's patience began to spiderweb into a catastrophic fracture, came that evening. Julian had insisted on a casual get-together in the Monarch Suite before heading to another one of the resort's high-end restaurants. The suite was breathtaking, a sprawling apartment in the sky with its own private terrace and plunge pool. Julian stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of whiskey in his hand, looking out over the ocean as if he were its master. Clara was buzzing with excitement, her eyes wide as she took in the opulent surroundings. Oh, Julian, this is incredible, she breathed. It's like something out of a movie. Only the best for you, darling, Julian purred, turning to smile at her. Liam had followed them into the suite, feeling like an intruder. He stood quietly by the door, observing. The contrast between this place and their modest 3-bedroom home was a chasm. He had intentionally chosen that home, that life, as a test of character, of love, of values. He was beginning to understand that it was a test his wife had failed. Julian, noticing Liam lingering by the entrance, snapped his fingers. "Liam, my man, be useful. My shoes are a bit scuffed from the tennis court. There's a shoe shine kit in the master closet. First door on the right. Give them a quick buff, would you?" The request was so audacious, so openly contemptuous, that the room fell silent for a beat. Richard and Eleanor froze, their drinks halfway to their lips. This wasn't a subtle jab, it was a public shaming, a deliberate act of dominance. Liam's eyes went to Clara. This was it. This was the moment of truth. He saw the flash of shock on her face, the brief, horrified recognition of how far this had gone. Here was her chance to draw the line, to defend the dignity of her husband. Her mouth opened, and for a split second, Liam thought she would finally speak up. Instead, she turned to him, her face a mask of pleading desperation. "Liam," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Just don't make a scene, please. Don't make a scene." Not, "How dare you speak to my husband that way?" Not, "Apologize to him right now," but a plea for him to swallow the insult, to accept the degradation, to prioritize her social comfort over his own self-respect. In that moment, something inside Liam finally and irrevocably broke. The patient analyst, the quiet observer, receded. The love and affection he held for his wife, a warm and steady light, flickered and went out, plunging his heart into a cold, clear darkness. He saw her not as the woman he loved, but as a stranger whose values were so alien to his own that he could no longer recognize her. "Of course," Liam said, his voice unnervingly calm. He walked past them, his footsteps making no sound on the thick carpet. He went into the master bedroom, found the closet, and located the shoeshine kit. He picked up Julian's expensive Italian leather loafers. They were soft and ridiculously overpriced. He took out the brush and the polish. He didn't shine the shoes. He sat on the edge of the ridiculously large bed and took out his phone. He sent a single text message to Anya Petrova. "Accelerate the timeline. I want everything in place for the Friday dinner. Everything." He then opened another app on his phone, a secure proprietary portal for his personal finances. With a few taps, he initiated a transfer. He moved $10 million from one of his holding accounts into a new, separate trust. He designated a single beneficiary, Clara Thorne. He titled the trust The Simple Life. It was a severance package, an exit. He put the phone away. He looked at the shoes in his hands. He thought about the man in the other room, a man so blinded by his own petty ego that he thought this act of humiliation was a victory. He thought about his father-in-law, a man drowning in debt while dispensing advice on ambition. And he thought about his wife, the woman who had just asked him to kneel so she wouldn't have to stand up. He placed the shoes neatly on the floor, untouched. He walked out of the bedroom and back into the living area of the suite. They all looked at him, expecting him to present the polished shoes like a servant. Clara looked relieved, thinking he had complied, that the scene had been avoided. Liam walked past Julian, past Clara, and straight to the door of the suite. He didn't look back. "Where are you going?" Clara called after him, a note of panic in her voice. "Dinner is in 20 minutes. Liam paused at the door, his hand on the handle. He turned his head slightly, his face in shadow. "I have a few things to arrange," he said, his voice as empty and vast as the evening sky outside. "You all enjoy your dinner." He stepped out and closed the door behind him with a soft, final click. The sound was barely audible, but for Liam, it was as loud as a slamming vault door, sealing one part of his life away forever. The storm was no longer gathering, it had arrived. The next 2 days passed in a haze of surreal calm, the quiet before the cataclysm. Liam was a polite and distant presence. He attended meals, he sat by the pool, he answered direct questions with courteous brevity. But the man who had arrived at the resort was gone. In his place was a stranger with his husband's face, an automaton performing the functions of a vacationing spouse. He was an empty vessel, his emotions and thoughts now running on a separate, hidden track. Clara felt the change, and it unnerved her. The air between them was thick with unspoken words. She tried to bridge the chasm, to return to their familiar dynamic. "Are you all right, honey?" she asked one afternoon, touching his arm as he stared out at the ocean. "You've been so quiet." Liam turned to look at her, his eyes clear and cold. "I'm fine, Clara, just thinking." "About what?" she pressed, searching his face for a sign of the man she knew. "About value," he said simply. "How we determine what things are worth." He then turned back to the ocean, the conversation over. Her attempts to draw him back into the fold were clumsy and misdirected. She didn't apologize for what had happened in Julian's suite. She seemed to want to pretend it never occurred. She tried to be affectionate, but her touch felt like a trespass. She didn't understand that the man she was trying to reach was no longer there. He had retreated to a place she couldn't follow, a place built of disappointment and resolve. Meanwhile, Julian, mistaking Liam's withdrawal for capitulation, became even more insufferable. He saw Liam's quietness as proof of his defeat. He strutted and preened, his ego swelling to fill the vacuum Liam had left. He made grand pronouncements about his financial acumen. He openly flirted with Clara, and he treated Liam with a kind of weary contempt, like a victor who has grown bored of his vanquished foe. "You should really get Liam into a gym, Clara," he said one evening, loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. "Build some confidence in the poor fellow." Liam didn't even blink. He was a statue, impervious to the petty squalls of Julian's ego. He was watching the clock, counting down the hours. His team was moving silently and swiftly in the background. The $1.2 billion acquisition of the resort's parent company was complete. The deed was being flown in on a private jet. The deep dive financial analysis of Thorne Industries was finished, and it was worse than he'd imagined. The company was a house of cards in a hurricane, weeks away from total collapse. Anya had also prepared a second portfolio, a dossier on Julian's firm, detailing its precarious leveraging, its borderline illegal trading practices, and a list of its most vulnerable, high-net-worth clients. Everything was in place. The board was set. The pieces were positioned. All that remained was the final move. Friday evening arrived. It was the last night of their vacation. Julian, in a final act of self-aggrandizement, had booked the resort's most coveted dining experience, the Celestial Table, a private glass-walled pavilion set on a pier that stretched out over the ocean. It was designed for proposals, for anniversary celebrations, for moments of profound significance. Julian had co-opted it for his coronation. They walked down the pier as the sun began to set, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. Julian walked with Clara, his arm possessively around her waist. Richard and Eleanor followed, chattering excitedly. Liam walked alone, a few paces behind them all. He was dressed in the same simple, unassuming clothes he always wore, dark trousers and a plain, button-down shirt. He looked, as always, like he didn't belong. As they reached the pavilion, Julian turned to the group with a magnanimous smile. "A final celebration," he announced, "to a wonderful week and to new beginnings." He looked pointedly at Clara, then shot a triumphant smirk in Liam's direction. They entered the pavilion. The table was set for 5, with flickering candles and a centerpiece of exotic flowers. Through the glass walls, the ocean seemed to stretch into infinity. It was a scene of breathtaking beauty, a perfect stage for the drama that was about to unfold. They took their seats. A waiter appeared instantly, pouring champagne into tall, elegant flutes. Julian raised his glass for a toast. "To friendship," he began, his eyes on Clara, "old and new, and to having the vision to reach for what you truly deserve." The insult, aimed squarely at Liam, was as clear as the glass surrounding them. Clara flushed, a mixture of pleasure and guilt warring on her face. Richard and Eleanor drank enthusiastically. Liam did not raise his glass. He sat perfectly still, his hands resting on the table. He looked at his wife. He saw the way the candlelight softened her features, the way she basked in the glow of Julian's attention. He felt a final, hollow pang of what he used to feel for her. It was the echo of a love that was now dead. He subtly checked his phone beneath the table. A single, unread message was waiting for him. It was from Anya. "The package has arrived. The courier is at the main entrance of the pier." Liam took a slow, deep breath. He placed his phone face down on the table. He looked up, his gaze sweeping over the faces of the people who had spent a week systematically dismantling his dignity. Julian, smug and triumphant. Richard and Eleanor, blinded by their own shallow aspirations. And Clara, his wife, a willing accomplice in her own husband's humiliation. The quiet before the storm was over. The first drops of rain were beginning to fall. A man in a sharp, dark suit was walking briskly down the pier towards them, a leather briefcase in his hand. He was not a waiter. He was not a member of the resort staff. He walked with a purpose that was entirely out of place in this temple of leisure. The show was about to begin. The man in the suit stopped just outside the glass pavilion, his presence an immediate and jarring intrusion. He scanned the table, his eyes passing over Julian, Richard, and Eleanor before locking onto Liam. He gave a short, respectful nod. Julian, annoyed by the interruption to his moment, waved a dismissive hand. "We're in the middle of a private dinner here. Whatever it is, it can wait." The man ignored him completely. His focus remained on Liam. From inside the pavilion, Liam gave a subtle, almost imperceptible gesture with his hand. The man opened the glass door and stepped inside, the sea breeze momentarily rustling the tablecloth. "Mr. Sterling," the man said, his voice professional and direct. "My apologies for the interruption." He placed the leather briefcase on a small side table and unlatched it. A wave of confusion washed over the table. "Sterling?" Richard muttered, looking at Liam with a frown. "He's got the wrong person. Your name is O'Connell, isn't it?" Clara stared at Liam, her brow furrowed. "Liam, what is this? Who is this man?" Julian let out a condescending chuckle. "Probably trying to serve him papers. Couldn't pay his credit card bill, I imagine." He took a smug sip of his champagne. Liam finally moved. He pushed his chair back slightly and turned to face the courier. "Thank you, Marcus. Is everything in order?" "Yes, sir," Marcus replied. He pulled out a sleek black tablet in a thick folio of documents bound in blue. The transfer of ownership for the parent company, Helios Hospitality Group, was finalized at 1700 hours Zulu time. All assets, including the Azure Horizon Resort, are now under the full control of the Orion Capital subsidiary. We just need your final digital signature to execute the management transition. The words hung in the air, incomprehensible. Helios Hospitality, Orion Capital. These were not terms that belonged in a conversation with Liam O'Connell, the freelance data analyst. Richard Thorne, whose business gave him a passing familiarity with such terms, looked utterly bewildered. Orion Capital? That's a ghost fund. No one knows who's behind it. They've been buying up distressed luxury assets all year. "Liam?" Clara's voice was a thin, reedy whisper. The color was draining from her face. She looked from the stoic courier to her husband, the husband she had ordered to fetch drinks and carry her bags. A terrible, impossible suspicion was beginning to dawn in her eyes. Liam took the tablet from Marcus. His finger hovered over the screen. He looked up, his gaze finally settling on Julian. "You asked me what the biggest deal I ever closed was," Liam said, his voice quiet but carrying an immense weight. It was the first time he had initiated a conversation all evening. "You were disappointed in my answer." Julian scoffed, though a flicker of uncertainty now danced in his eyes. "What is this, Liam? Some kind of pathetic prank? Did you hire an actor to impress us?" "This deal is relatively small in the grand scheme of things," Liam continued, ignoring Julian's bluster. He gestured around the pavilion. "A little over $1 billion. A rounding error, really. I mostly bought it because I found the service to be lacking." He pressed his thumb to the screen. A green check mark appeared with a soft chime. Effective immediately, the entire senior management of this resort is terminated. You'll be escorted off the property within the hour, he said to the heir, knowing Marcus would relay the order. Marcus simply nodded. Understood, Mr. Sterling. The name. He had said it again. Sterling. It was Richard who made the connection first. His face went slack, a ghastly shade of pale. His champagne glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor. Sterling, he stammered, his eyes wide with horror. As in, Liam Sterling, the founder of Nexus Dynamics? The name dropped into the silence of the pavilion like a bomb. Nexus Dynamics, the mythical, monstrously successful tech company, the $41 billion behemoth that was the white whale of every investor, including Julian. The company Richard had been desperately, fruitlessly trying to get a meeting with for 6 months to save his own failing business. Julian's face crumpled. The smugness, the arrogance, the effortless confidence, it all dissolved in an instant, replaced by a raw, naked panic. No, he whispered, shaking his head. No, that's not possible. You're a freelance data analyst, Liam finished for him, a cold, mirthless smile touching his lips for the first time. That is what I do. I analyze data. The data I've been collecting all week has been particularly illuminating. He turned his gaze to Clara. She was frozen, her hands pressed to her mouth, her eyes filled with a dawning, catastrophic understanding. Every slight, every moment of shame, every time she had chosen Julian's ego over her husband's dignity, it all came rushing back to her, now cast in a horrifying new light. The man she was embarrassed by, the man she thought was holding her back, was one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in the world. The monarch suite you're so proud of, Julian, Liam said, his voice cutting through the silence like a surgeon's scalpel. I trust you'll have your things packed in 30 minutes. Security will assist you. Your credit card, by the way, was declined when you checked in. The hotel manager covered the hold out of courtesy, a courtesy I have just rescinded. Julian stared at him, speechless. He opened his mouth, but only a dry, croaking sound came out. Liam then picked up the thick folio of documents Marcus had brought. He slid one section across the polished table towards Richard Thorne. Thorne Industries, Liam said. I believe this is your company, or what's left of it. Your main supplier is terminating their contract on Monday due to non-payment. Your bank is calling in its loan. You're 3 weeks from bankruptcy. You are going to beg Nexus Dynamics for a bailout. Well, I am Nexus Dynamics. And the answer is no. Richard looked like he had been struck by lightning. Eleanor let out a small, strangled sob. Finally, Liam's full, undivided attention fell upon his wife. He looked at Clara, the woman he had built a false world for, hoping to find a true love within it. You, he said, his voice now devoid of all anger, holding only a vast, empty sadness. You were ashamed of me. It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact, a verdict. Liam, I didn't know, she stammered, tears now streaming down her face. I'm so sorry, I didn't know. That, Liam said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, is the entire point. You didn't know, and it shouldn't have mattered. He stood up. The power dynamic in the room had not just shifted, it had been annihilated and rebuilt from scratch. The man who had been treated as a servant was now the undisputed king, and the jesters who had mocked him were now prostrate at his feet. Marcus the courier stepped forward. Mr. Sterling, your chief operating officer, Miss Petrova, has arrived. She is waiting for you in the lobby. Thank you, Marcus, Liam said. He looked one last time at the wreckage of his dinner, at the shattered illusions of the people he once called family. He walked towards the door of the pavilion, his back straight, his steps firm. Liam, wait, Clara cried, stumbling to her feet. Please, don't go. He paused at the door but didn't turn around. I have a meeting, he said, his voice distant. We're discussing the acquisition of a small, failing investment firm. Something about predicting micro fluctuations in the commodities market. It seems they've been using a rather outdated algorithm. He stepped out into the night, leaving them alone in their glass cage, the beautiful sunset mocking the ugliness of their revelation. The immediate aftermath was a tableau of disintegration. The moment Liam stepped out of the glass pavilion, the fragile ecosystem of arrogance he left behind collapsed into chaos. Julian was the first to break. His face, which had been a mask of smug superiority for a week, was now a contorted mess of disbelief and terror. "This can't be happening," he mumbled, more to himself than to anyone else. He fumbled for his phone, his fingers shaking so badly he could barely unlock it. He typed Liam Sterling Nexus Dynamics into the search bar. His screen illuminated his face with a pale, sickly light. He saw the photos, the same unassuming man from the dinner table, but this time shaking hands with world leaders, gracing the cover of Forbes, standing on stages in front of tens of thousands. The net worth estimate, $41 billion, seemed to mock him from the screen. He made a sound, a guttural mix of a sob and a gasp. The man he had ordered to shine his shoes could buy and sell his entire existence 1,000 times over and not even notice the expense. He looked up at Clara, his eyes wild with desperation. "You knew," he hissed, his voice cracking. "You must have known. This was a setup." Clara, who was still standing frozen by the table, flinched as if struck. "No," she whispered, shaking her head in a daze. "I had no idea." Her mind was a maelstrom of conflicting images. Liam struggling with her suitcases. Liam quietly enduring Julian's taunts. Liam sitting alone by the pool. And now, Liam, the man from the articles, the titan of industry. The cognitive dissonance was so profound, it made her feel physically ill. She had been living in a fairy tale, she realized, but she had completely misunderstood the roles. She thought Julian was the prince and Liam was the stable boy. She had discovered, far too late, that her husband was the king who had disguised himself to walk amongst his people, and she had spat in his face. Richard Thorne, meanwhile, was frantically trying to salvage the situation. His own impending ruin was a roaring fire in his mind. He scrambled up from his chair and rushed to the pavilion door, peering out into the darkness where Liam had disappeared. "Liam, son, wait!" he shouted, his voice hoarse. "We can talk about this. A misunderstanding." There was no reply but the sound of the waves crashing against the pier. He turned back, his face ashen. "Eleanor, what do we do?" Eleanor, who had been silent through the entire ordeal, was weeping quietly into her napkin. "You were so awful to him, Richard," she sobbed. "We all were. We treated him like nothing." "Don't you start," Richard snapped, his panic turning to anger. He rounded on Julian. "And you, this is your fault. With your big talk and your fancy suite, you pushed him. You humiliated him in front of us." "My fault?" Julian shrieked, finding his voice in a wave of indignation. "She's his wife. She just stood there and let it happen. She was embarrassed by him. She loved every second of it." Clara sank back into her chair, the accusations striking her with the force of physical blows. Because it was true. She had been embarrassed. She had craved the glamour and status that Julian represented, a glamour she felt Liam denied her. She had looked at her husband's quiet dignity and mistaken it for a lack of ambition. She had measured his worth in the currency of appearances and found him wanting. The shame of it was a physical weight, crushing the air from her lungs. Her phone buzzed on the table. It was a notification from her bank. "A deposit of $10 million has been made to your new trust account, the Simple Life." She stared at the words, her blood running cold. $10 million, a fortune beyond her wildest dreams. But the name of the trust was a final, devastating judgment. The Simple Life, the life she had scorned, the life she had apologized for. It was a golden cage, a severance package, a clear and unequivocal statement that her part in his life was over. This wasn't a punishment, it was a settlement. He was closing her account. Just then, two imposing men in the resort's security uniforms appeared at the door of the pavilion. They did not look friendly. The first one addressed Julian, his voice devoid of any deference. "Sir, you have 30 minutes to vacate the Monarch suite. We are here to escort you." The second guard looked at Richard and Eleanor. "And for you, sir, madam, your reservation has been canceled. A taxi to the airport has been arranged for you, at Mr. Sterling's expense." The finality of it was absolute. They were being evicted, not just from the resort, but from the world they had briefly inhabited, a world that had turned out to be Liam's personal property. Julian began to stammer, to protest, but the look in the guard's eyes silenced him. Defeated, he slumped, all the fight gone out of him. Richard, for his part, seemed to have aged 10 years in as many minutes. He allowed Eleanor to help him to his feet, a broken man. Clara remained at the table, watching them go. The security guards waited for her. "Ma'am?" one of them asked, his voice gentle but firm. "Mr. Sterling has instructed that you may remain in your original suite for as long as you require. All your expenses will be covered." It was the cruelest kindness. He wasn't throwing her out. He was leaving her behind, alone in the wreckage of their marriage, with $10 million to remind her of exactly what she had lost. It wasn't just the money. She had lost the man. The good, kind, patient man who had loved her. The man she had never truly seen. She looked at the $10 million notification on her phone, then out at the dark, empty ocean. She had never felt so poor in her entire life. The days that followed were a study in consequence. For Julian, the fallout was swift and brutal. News in the high finance world travels at the speed of light, and the story of how a small-time fund manager had publicly humiliated the reclusive, incognito founder of Nexus Dynamics became the stuff of instant legend. It was a cautionary tale told with glee in boardrooms and over expensive lunches. Julian's already precarious firm imploded. His high-net-worth clients, terrified of being associated with someone who had so monumentally offended a man like Liam Sterling, pulled their money out in a panic. The calls he made to his creditors went unanswered. The 17% return he had bragged about was revealed to be a product of creative accounting. Within a week, his firm was insolvent. Within a month, he was facing investigation by financial regulators. His fall was as spectacular as his rise had been false. For Richard and Eleanor Thorne, the consequences were more personal. A slow, grinding decline. They returned home not to their comfortable life, but to a cascade of failure. Just as Liam had stated, their primary supplier terminated their contract. Their bank, no longer willing to extend credit to a failing enterprise, called in their loans. Thorne Industries, the company Richard had built over 30 years, crumbled into bankruptcy. They had to sell their large family home, the symbol of their lifelong aspirations, and move into a small condominium. The shame was suffocating. Richard, once a man of blustering pride, became a ghost, haunted by the memory of his own arrogance. He had lectured a billionaire on ambition, while his own empire was turning to dust. The poetic justice was so perfect, so complete, that it offered no catharsis, only a profound and lasting bitterness. But for Clara, the consequences were internal, a silent and solitary reckoning. She stayed at the Azure Horizon Resort for 3 more days, a ghost in a paradise that now felt like a prison. The staff, now aware of who she was, or rather, who she wasn't anymore, treated her with a kind of fearful, pitying deference. She ate alone in her suite, the one she had once shared with Liam. The $10 million sat in her trust account, untouched. It felt like blood money, the price of her own blindness. She replayed the entire week in her mind, over and over, each memory a fresh torment. She saw Liam's face, patient and calm, as Julian mocked him. She heard her own voice, telling him not to make a scene. Each memory was a mirror, and in it she saw a woman she despised, shallow, weak, and starstruck by the cheapest kind of glamour. She had traded a mountain of gold for a handful of glitter. When she finally left the resort, she didn't go back to their house. She couldn't. It was his house, she now understood. Every simple, unassuming object in it was a choice he had made, a part of the illusion he had built for her, an illusion she had shattered. She checked into a nondescript hotel in the city and tried to figure out what to do. A week after the disastrous dinner, a letter arrived for her at the hotel, delivered by a courier. It was from Liam. Her hands trembled as she opened it. It wasn't an angry letter. It wasn't accusatory. It was worse. It was calm, logical, and deeply sad. "Clara," it began, "I have spent the last 5 years of my life living a lie, not to deceive, but to discover. I wanted to build a life with someone who valued integrity, kindness, and partnership above all else. I wanted to be loved for the man I was, not the balance in my bank account. For a long time, I truly believed I had found that with you. The trip to the resort was a test, I admit," he continued, "not for you, but for my own convictions. I wanted to see if the world I had built with you was strong enough to withstand the pressures of the world I left behind. I wanted to see if our foundation was strong enough to resist the allure of superficial status and wealth, as embodied by a man like Julian. I saw you choose that world, again and again. You did not defend me. You did not defend our life. You apologized for it. You were ashamed of it. And you were ashamed of me. The $10 million is yours no matter what," the letter concluded. "I consider it a debt owed for the years we shared. It can provide you with the life of comfort you seem to desire. As for us, the foundation is broken. Trust, once lost, cannot simply be rebuilt. I need time. Perhaps, one day, you will understand the man you married. To do that, I think you must first understand yourself. I wish you peace in that journey." The letter was signed simply, Liam. Clara read the letter a dozen times, the tears blurring the words. He wasn't punishing her. He was releasing her. He was giving her the freedom to become the person she thought she wanted to be, knowing it wasn't a person he could love. The choice was hers. She could take the money and live a life of empty luxury, forever haunted by what she had thrown away. Or she could begin the long, painful journey he had laid out for her, the journey of understanding herself. She looked at her reflection in the dark hotel window. For the first time, she didn't see the put-together woman who cared so much about appearances. She saw a stranger, and she knew Liam was right. She had to find out who that person was. The resolution did not come quickly, nor did it arrive in a grand, cinematic gesture. There was no tearful reunion, no dramatic forgiveness. True change, Liam knew, was a quiet, methodical process, much like the building of a complex system. It required time, effort, and a genuine rewiring of core principles. Liam threw himself back into his work, but the experience had changed him. He shed the last vestiges of his reclusive persona. He took a more public role at Nexus Dynamics, not for the fame, but because he realized that hiding his true self had created a vulnerability he hadn't anticipated. He had built a fortress to protect his heart, only to find he had locked the wrong person inside with him. He was still the same calm, analytical man, but a new layer of wisdom now coated his actions, a sadness that tempered his immense power. He kept tabs on Clara, not out of lingering affection, but from a sense of detached responsibility. He saw that she didn't touch the $10 million. The account remained dormant, a silent testament to a choice being made. Instead, she moved into a small, one-bedroom apartment in a modest part of the city. She sold the expensive clothes and jewelry she owned, items she now saw as artifacts from a life that wasn't hers. Then she did something that surprised him. She enrolled in a paralegal certification program at a local community college. It was difficult. She was older than most of the other students, and the work was demanding. There was no glamour in it, no social status. It was about rules, about facts, about the meticulous application of principles. For the first time in her life, she was building something of her own, from the ground up, with no help from anyone. Months passed. Liam watched from a distance as she finished her program and took an entry-level job at a small nonprofit that provided legal aid to low-income families. Her starting salary was a pittance, less than the cost of a single pair of shoes she had once owned. She worked long hours, dealing with people whose problems were real and raw: evictions, domestic disputes, battles for basic rights. She saw true hardship, and in doing so, she began to understand the profound privilege she had always taken for granted. One afternoon, nearly a year after the disaster at the Azure Horizon, Liam's COO, Anya Petrova, came into his office. "A donation request came through our philanthropic division," she said, placing a folder on his desk. "It's from a small legal aid clinic downtown. They're seeking a grant to expand their services. The proposal is well-written, detailed, and compelling." Liam opened the folder. He read through the proposal, his analytical mind appreciating the clarity and precision of the document. It was impressive work. On the last page, under the list of staff, he saw her name: Clara Thorne, paralegal. She had gone back to her maiden name. He looked at the name for a long time. The woman who had written this proposal was not the woman who had begged him not to make a scene. This was a person who understood structure, who valued integrity, who fought for things that mattered. This was a person he could respect. He closed the folder. "Anya," he said, his voice quiet, "approve the grant, double the amount they requested, and do it anonymously." "Understood," she said. As she turned to leave, she paused. "Will that be all, Liam?" He looked out the vast window of his office, which overlooked the sprawling city. He thought of the simple house he had once shared with her, the life he had tried to build. Maybe, he mused, a foundation that has been shattered can't be repaired. But perhaps on the same plot of land, with new materials and a better design, a stronger structure can be built. It wouldn't be the same. It would be something new, something better. "No, Anya," he said, turning from the window. "There is one more thing. Get me a number for a Clara Thorne. I believe she works at the downtown legal aid clinic. I'd like to invite her for a cup of coffee." It wasn't a promise of a happy ending. It was just a data point, a new beginning, a chance to see if the person she had become was someone the man he had always been could finally meet. What a journey of self-discovery and consequence. It really shows that true worth isn't about what you have, but who you are when no one is looking. The most valuable things in life, respect, integrity, and love, can't be bought. They have to be earned. I have to ask you guys, what do you think? After everything that happened, does Clara deserve a second chance with Liam? Or was the damage too deep to ever be fully repaired? Let me know your honest thoughts in the comments below. I read as many as I can. If you found this story satisfying and it made you feel something, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more stories about justice, redemption, and the power of hidden strength. It truly means the world to me and helps our community grow. Thank you for being here, and I can't wait to see you in the next one.